Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. Today is Sunday, December 28th, 2025. So this will be our final salon of this year, though we will be back next week as well. And we have been streaming our virtual enlightenment salons for over 5.5 years now. So thank you to our dedicated viewers for being with us. And today we bring you another fascinating conversation. We are joined by our esteemed U.S. Transhumanist Party officers, Art Ramon Garcia, our Director of Visual Art, and Daniel Tweed, our 2024 U.S. Vice Presidential Candidate and Director of Community and Citizen Science. And our special guest today is someone I have known for a long time, David Primer. He is the founder of StrataQuant, a boutique data technology consulting company based in Chicago, Illinois. He is a certified professional in business intelligence and a Lean Six Sigma black belt. He brings the disciplined scientific approach. He practiced performing cancer research to data analytics, and he received his Bachelor of Science degree in molecular biology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and his master's degree in cancer biology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So he really brings quite a powerful combination of skill sets with his expertise in both biology and data science. I will also mention his website, StrataQuant.com, is a wealth of information, and there he has episodes of his podcast called Profit is a Science. So if you want to learn more about the scientific approach for generating profits for your enterprise, then it is well worth a listen. I have listened to all of the episodes of Profit is a Science thus far, and I look forward to listening to more. But David, welcome. And actually, we know each other now for, wow, 24 years. Time flies.
Oh, wow. I was going to say 16, but you're right. I was off by a tens digit. Yes, we've known each other. We met each other when we were 14.
Yes.
So it's been quite some time. So I'm sure I know that. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be a guest. This is a very long running interaction you have with your community. And I remember you speaking about these, I listened to your video at the beginning, and the passion that you show for this topic you showed when we met over 25 years ago. So it's fantastic to see you continuing that. And I'd be happy to field, after I'm through the talk, any questions that anybody has about what Mr. Stoliarov was like as a 14, 15-year-old. I'm more than happy to respond. Spoiler alert, he wasn't that different. Not because he was basically a man at 14. I was jealous of his facial hair then. I'm jealous of his facial hair now. Not much has changed, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
All right. Well, if you have any questions on that, please feel free to post them in our chat. And in the meantime, David has a presentation prepared for us, so we will elevate it once it is ready to go. And I will say, again, for those of you who are new to data science, this presentation will teach you a lot. It will teach you some fundamental principles of looking at data and how medical analytics teaches us to be skeptical about certain narratives that may actually not be borne out by the empirical facts. So, David, thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Wonderful. So before I really dive into this, I don't want you to be nervous. I just want to mention a couple of things. First of all, I'm not going to assume that you know anything deeply about either medicine or about data science. I'm really trying to keep this at a level where we take some lessons that come from the medical community about how they approach analytics and allow those lessons to be applied to your daily life, right? But like from the Transhumanist Party is all about improving your quality of life, getting yourself to a place of longevity, and just keep it at a very high level. Analytics is about the pursuit of truth. And for us to extend our lives and to make those lives higher quality, we want to be operating in truth. If we have a better understanding as to what improves our physical health, about what improves our relationships, what improves our, our financial health, our businesses, our society, we want to have access to truth so we can implement those changes and make a positive impact. So don't be worried that I'm going to go deeply into biochemical pathways. I won't be. Don't be worried that I'm going to be talking about the specifics of how to code a machine learning algorithm. I will not be. This is going to be focused on the lessons that can be applied to your daily life. So with that being said, I'm passionate about this topic. I spoke with Gennady about it when we saw each other a few months ago for our high school reunion. And I think that's what really spurred this conversation because I'm so passionate about it. And he said that he had a great medium for me to discuss it with you and hopefully could provide you with some value. So specifically, I'm passionate about this concept of narratives and how narratives can negatively impact how we go about making decisions in our daily lives. And that includes in business, not just in our personal lives. And medical analytics provides us with defenses we can use against those narratives. So that's what this conversation is going to be about. So the first kind of concept I want to introduce to you is that narratives are harmful. And before I can really justify that, we have to define what a narrative is. So if you plug in narrative into Google, you're going to see that it says that narrative is a spoken or written account of connected events or a story. Now, I'm going to frame it in a little bit of a different way. In the context of analytics, I'm saying a narrative is a statement that is framed as truth. So it's not really framed as a question. It's not even framed as a hypothesis. It's framed as this is the way that things are. It's got an air of authority around it. It is typically a generalization, and it's typically an untested hypothesis. So if I say something like it's 45 degrees outside, that's not a narrative. That's more of a fact. Now, maybe you can dispute that, but it's a data point. Whereas if I say something like it's too cold to do anything, or it's really cold, well, that's not really a data point. You can be more specific about it because the word cold is somewhat subjective. It's kind of general, right? It encompasses a large range of temperatures. So that's more of a narrative. So with that in mind, I want you to ask yourself, when's the last time you heard a statement that met these criteria? A statement that was said with an air of authority. Instead of providing specific details, it was kind of a generality. Well, I'm pulling a fast one on you because the last time you heard a statement like that is when I told you that narratives were harmful, right? It's a generalization. It's not specific. I'm telling you a story. This is the bad guy, okay? Because that's not really the best way to put it. So I'm not nullifying my entire talk here. I am saying there are better ways to phrase a statement like this. And I'm going to kind of acknowledge right now that narratives do have some benefits. So to sell you on this, I'm going to make a couple points. Hopefully you agree with me on all of them. Number one, we want to live in a productive society. Number two, people are generally more productive when they are happy, which means that number three, any statements or actions, but in this case, we're talking about statements, that are harmless in a vacuum and they lead people to being happier are thus productive. So what's an example? If somebody's dog dies and they tell themselves that, well, the dog is in a better place. Is that a data point? Not really. That's a narrative, right? The dog is in a better place. It's not something that is really that disprovable. It's not a specific piece of data, but that is a story that serves to help that person feel better because, dogs are important members of the family, and when they die, it can be very it can be difficult to deal with emotionally. So if the narrative that the dog is in a better place helps that person feel better, that is beneficial and that narrative is helpful. The other thing I want to point out as to why narratives exist, and this is one of the most crucial aspects of our entire discussion today, because it's rooted in human nature. It doesn't go away. So there's nothing going to be from this talk where you stop having narratives that pop up in your life. The issue isn't preventing them from popping up. It's identifying when they do pop up, because they're going to pop up at like when we feel hungry for food. It's about knowing what to do with them when they do pop up. So humans process stories better than raw data. When people that have the best memories in the world, so these are the people that can memorize pi out to 300 digits, or people that can memorize sequences of cards, playing cards, a sequence of hundreds of playing cards long. What they'll all tell you is they'll all construct a story to help them remember the order of events. That's kind of how our brains are built. That's not a bad thing. Our brains are built in a way that allowed us to survive tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years ago. So that's the equipment that we still have, though. So our brains are not built to deal with raw data. It's built to turn that raw data into a story, so it's something that we can remember. The issue is that equipment that we have in our head was not built really for analytics. It was built to get us to an age where we can have offspring and raise those offspring so they can be self-sufficient, and then we're not really needed anymore, right? So we can do better than that. And that's why with the equipment that we have to be aware of what narratives, how they can be hurting us. So we know that we operate better when we're told a story. Narratives are also built for unique outcomes. So when you see a situation you've never seen before, it helps to have a story around it. And this last point kind of puts those last two together. Humans, we have a need, and it's a primal instinct to have an explanation, even if it's not true. We do not do well with the idea that we don't know something and we just sit in that lack of knowledge. It's uncomfortable. Think about the last time you were sitting in your home and you heard some kind of a sound and you didn't know exactly what it was. Chances are your brain didn't think, oh, I don't know what that sound was. Chances are you thought to yourself, that was probably the ice machine, or a coat fell down in the closet. Doesn't matter if it was true or not. You would feel better having an explanation, even if you didn't have data around it. Doesn't mean you got up and you checked. Maybe you didn't need to check. But the point is, you came up with a story, even though you didn't have any data in front of you, because it was better to have a story that was unsubstantiated than not to have story at all in terms of how you're feeling about it. That is primal. That's always going to be the case. That's the way it is with me also. I am not a robot. I just choose to be aware of when these narratives pop up because I want to obtain truth as much as I possibly can. So that's something to keep in mind as to where these narratives come from, but they do have some benefits. So now let's talk about analytics. I'm going to keep this at a very high level. One thing Mr. Stolarov didn't mention, I do teach a course in for MIT about analytics, and this is what I tell them. I tell them that if you were to boil down analytics to one thing, it's there to predict the future. And it sounds supernatural, but it's really not. So, I mean, let's say that you are working in marketing and you are looking at a lot of marketing data, different marketing campaigns. You're trying to identify what campaign is likely going to be the best for a particular product. That's an analytics question, right? But what it's boiling down to is I'm trying to predict the future. I'm trying to say which one of these marketing campaigns will provide me with the most profit or the most revenue. So most of the time, that's what it boils down to. And at the core of analytics is actionable intelligence. Both of these words. If you're not getting actionable intelligence, analytics is not a good application for what you're looking to do. So by intelligence, I mean information as to what is likely going to happen. And it has to be actionable. So it can't just be information for information's sake. Sometimes people will say, and I'm giving business examples, but this can happen in everyday life. Our sales were down 3% last quarter. That's not exactly actionable intelligence. I'm not saying it's not important. Excuse me. I'm not saying it's not actually important. I am suggesting that it's a precursor to actionable intelligence. Actionable intelligence would be something like the return on investment is higher in marketing campaign A than it is on marketing campaign B. That's actionable because now I know, okay, that's very useful. I now have a direct link between where my money should be going and my profits, right? So it needs to have both of these things. Now, the actions that are taken should be leading to outcomes that actually matter. It shouldn't be meaningless. So in business, that's meaning those actions should lead directly to higher profits or revenue or cutting costs. In medicine, it means improved health. And in our personal lives, that means it should be leading to a higher quality of life. That's when we want to be applying these analytics. Another aspect of analytics that are absolutely required are singular optimization metrics. Now, that's kind of a mouthful, but all I mean is that any kind of model that is built, right? And so like a model is just an equation that relates variables to one another. And then you can use that equation to feed in future information. And that future information will tell you kind of what you should be doing next. So as an example, if I'm trying to predict what my sales are going to be next quarter, right? You can have a model where I can feed in the sales from the previous quarter along with other information. And then my model will tell me, okay, well, next quarter, my projected sales will be X number of dollars, or I'll grow by Y%. Okay. Any kind of model that is built, it could be a simple linear regression model, which you've probably seen before. Imagine a scatter plot and you're trying to draw a line that fits those data points as closely as possible. That's a model. Or if you're talking about a model that's driven by artificial intelligence, it could be a model that's able to process an image. It could be a model that is able to take a large block of text and determine whether or not the text is positive or negative, or to summarize it. It's all training their parameters by optimizing a single metric. Now, linear regression might have one or two parameters. An AI model might have a couple of billion, but they still, in order to train their model, to train any kind of model, there has to be something that they determine is good and something they determine as bad. And in order to have that, you need to have a singular metric, a singular dimension by which you're operating on. Now, that doesn't mean that that metric can't include a lot of different things in it, right? It can encompass a lot of different factors. But at the same time, it's still one singular metric. So what's an example of a singular metric that can be complex, but it's still singular? Think about a credit score. Think about everything that goes into a credit score. Lots of different things. How many things have you paid off? How long ago was it that you paid them off? What's the balance on your credit card? There's lots of things that go into it, but it does boil down to one number. Analytics works the same way. There's one number that any model is trying to optimize, and without that clarity as to that one number that it's trying to optimize, it won't be able to converge on a solution. So if we are operating in the realm of truth and not in the realm of emotion, we have to be clear about what we're trying to predict. Otherwise, we won't be able to converge on a solution. So that's a really important point. Now, the reason that I'm bringing that up is now I want to kind of put together narratives and analytics now that we've talked about both of them. So this is a Venn diagram. I mean that kind of tongue in cheek. Venn diagrams, typically the circles overlap. What I'm pointing out here is that the circles don't really overlap. Now, I will get into in a couple of minutes how narratives can help analytics, but it's more like those circles are touching. They don't really overlap themselves. So as we've discussed, narratives are very general. When I say something like narratives are harmful, that it's keeping it at a very high level. Narratives, they do function, they do provide a benefit, but in the realm of emotion. Now, whenever I say that, I am not trying to say that human emotion doesn't matter. I'm not saying that by any stretch. I'm saying, if anything, early on, I said human emotion is very important. If we are happy, we're more likely to be productive. We want people to be happy. I'm just stating as a statement of fact that if you're operating in the field of emotion, narratives can be helpful. But if you're operating in the field of actionable intelligence, trying to obtain truth, then narratives should not be playing a role when it comes to having conclusive statements. And finally, narratives are generally inspired by unique events. If one of your friends goes to a restaurant and they get food poisoning and they come back to tell you about it, they're probably not coming back to tell you this restaurant is more likely going to give somebody food poisoning. They're going to tell you all about that one data point that they experienced. That doesn't mean their data point is useless, meaningless. It does mean, however, that it is only one data point. So they can try to craft a story around it, but the fact is it's probably not going to have enough data to back it up. Now, I would understand that person saying, you know what, I don't feel comfortable going to that restaurant again. But maybe they were sick before they went. Maybe they got food poisoning for something they ate before or after going to the restaurant. Maybe the chef that was cooking there got fired, and now the new chef will be completely fine. The point is they're inspired by unique events. Whereas in analytics, it's very specific. We're looking at one very specific optimization metric when we're looking at developing a model. It also functions in the realm of actionable intelligence. We're trying to get to truth. And finally, analytics are fed by sample size. No decent model is trained on a small sample size. Try to feed it as large of a sample size as possible. If you think about any model that you really enjoy using, so like in today's day and age, it's things like ChatGPT or some of these large language models, they were fed by an enormous corpus of information, literally billions and billions, if not trillions of data points that helped feed what it was doing. So these things are very, very different from each other. So it's important that we identify in which realm we're operating, so we know whether we should be leaning on narratives or whether we should be leaning on analytics. So I want to go over some sample narratives, as I think they're interesting. It kind of points out where they're faulty. So the first example, as Gennady mentioned, I don't live in downtown right now. I used to live downtown Chicago, and oftentimes I met with some of my wife's family that previously lived in Chicago and then moved to the suburbs. And they would tell me things have gotten really bad in Chicago. Now, I'm very passionate about narratives. I have been for a while. So when I heard this, I thought to myself, that's a narrative. It's a general statement. They're not asking a question. They're not really citing a specific piece of data. It's a reasonable statement, but it's not. I didn't think it was appropriate yet to have it give it an air of authority. So I said, well, I wonder if things have gotten really bad in Chicago. So I did some research. And what you're seeing here is a graph of the number of violent crimes committed between 2000 and 2020. You could ignore the New York part of it. I'm only speaking to Chicago. I'm not even making the point here that things they're better now than they were before. I'm also not making the point, to be clear, that things aren't bad in Chicago. This graph is showing you that there's over 25,000 violent crimes per year in Chicago. That's far too many. There's no question that things are bad in Chicago. Where I would push back is the implication that things have gotten bad in Chicago. That implies that things were really good before, and now it's a lot worse. The data doesn't really justify that. I couldn't really find any data that showed that things were really peaceful, calm, and wonderful in Chicago before. And when this person lived there, and since they've moved back to the suburbs, things have gotten so much worse. So it doesn't justify going in there anymore. That's not really what I found. It's been bad the whole time. So the narrative which is really what this is implying, is that this person shouldn't be going back into the city now because it's worse than it was before. And this can make a big difference. I think Chicago is a fantastic world-class city. And I would say, all right, listen, if you were comfortable being in the city before and you found that your experience was, you enjoyed it, you knew where to go, you knew where not to go, more importantly, and when not to go there, and so you were safe, well, then you should be able to do that now because things are not worse. So, and notice how different this would be if instead of saying things have gotten bad in Chicago, the question was, have things gotten bad in Chicago? Now it's opening up to curiosity and digging into data. The other narrative I wanted to get into, and I promise you this is not going to get political, is we hear this every 2 years or 4 years. Our country is falling apart, right? This is something that we'll hear every single election cycle from generally the party that's not in power. Sometimes it's the party that's in power, but they'll blame the other party. Well, first of all, does this statement make us feel good? Probably not. So it definitely doesn't operate if we're just saying, hey, it's just about emotions. Well, it doesn't help us feel good. Is this really intelligence? Are we working with a fact here? Our country, and by our country, I know some people might be, I saw somebody who's listening from Bogota in Colombia. Regardless of what country you live in, any country that has many, many people is very, very complex. So to say something's falling apart, talk about a generality. There's lots of different buckets you could be speaking to. We don't really know what that means. It's kind of hard to disprove that statement. So it's not really intelligence. And is this really actionable to a single citizen? Even if I give you the benefit of the doubt and I'd be idealistic to say, yes, a single citizen can change the country, is there enough evidence to show that the reason that it's falling apart is because of the other party, right? Whatever party's saying this, they're saying, well, if you vote for the other party, the country's going to continue to fall apart. And if you vote for our party, then it won't. Is there really enough evidence to show that? Probably not. And I'm not, again, that's not a political statement. We just live in a very complex society. It'll be extremely difficult to directly tie political decisions to the general state of the country. So this is not a helpful narrative. And the last one that I'm going to speak to, that I think that these are kind of funny. When you hear the statement that we are in a bull market, I always think it's funny because this is operating specifically in the field of finance, right? So in finance, we're trying to predict the future because if you're able to predict the future, you'll make lots and lots of money. So when someone says we are in a bull market, it is kind of a statement of fact. So if you're not familiar, there are technical definitions as to what a bear market is and what a bull market is. Now, this kind of speaks to the third point I have here. So these are discrete categories. So there is a day where you will see, if you went to cnbc.com, it will say, we just moved from a bull market into a bear market, or vice versa. It has to do with the crossing of certain moving averages. Now, what's kind of funny about that is that means that there is a very specific line in the sand that we go from a bear market into a bull market. So that, and bear market in general is saying, oh my God, the market's falling down. The whole sentiment of everybody is terrible. People are afraid to invest. This is a really difficult time economically. And the bull market is the opposite. So I find it humorous that there is a single penny that exists that if the stock market goes above that penny, that means that everything's great. And if the market goes below that penny, that means that everything's terrible. That doesn't really make sense as a way. It doesn't make sense to discretely categorize the state of the economy into two buckets based off of a single penny, which is what this model currently does, number one. And number two, does this really help us predict the future? So the implication that we're in a bull market is it's saying that things have been going well. I can treat it as a statement of fact, like I said, because it is a technical definition that is retrospective. So if those moving averages are aligning with a bull market, then it's a statement of fact that we're in a bull market. But what's the point of talking about that if we're not trying to be fed information that's going to inform our decisions moving forward? So if the implication is it's a bull market, so that means we should invest. Well, doesn't that also mean that you're saying that if it's a bear market, we shouldn't be investing? And I'm pretty sure that every single investment magnate, by that I mean the billionaires that have made, billions of dollars invested in the stock market, they don't say, I know when to invest in the bull market, I know not to invest in the bear market. They generally say, the more time you spend in the market, the better. It's very difficult to predict market timing. That's not how they made their money. They made their money by staying invested for longer. That includes bear markets, which means this information is not actually. So first of all, I don't like the information because it's silly to me that a bull market and a bear market could change by one penny. But also, it's not that actionable, because I think you can agree that if you didn't invest during a bear market, by definition, you're saying you're not buying into the stock market when the stock market is lower. I'm not slamming investing in a bull market either. I'm not even saying to trust my opinion. Just read what Warren Buffett, Ray Dalio, Jack Bogle, what the highly successful finance professionals have advocated for, which is just staying invested in the market for longer. So these are narratives that we hear all the time that are not helpful because they don't provide actionable intelligence and they don't help us feel better. Now, I do want to touch on the place where narratives can exist in the analytics process, and that is narratives are a great way to provide questions. So analytics is the process of answering those questions, and I'm saying narratives are harmful because they're framed as answers. Things have gotten bad in Chicago. Our country's falling apart. These aren't questions. These are answers. This is the way that things are. I think if you frame narratives as questions, you now have interesting things to look into. And if you're coming up with a narrative, it means it's important to you. So it's probably worth looking into if you're operating in the field of truth. So if somebody is saying, let's go back to my family member or my in-law that is saying things have gotten really bad in Chicago. Well, that means they're considering spending more time in the city. And the assumption that the city's not doing well is preventing them from going into the city. That's harmful. Like it matters to them. Hey, buddy, please get out of here. Sorry about that. That it's not doing well. Sorry, please excuse me. That was myself. That it's not doing well. So it matters. But if you frame it as a question, now they can do research. They can discover the same thing that I discovered, which is that things actually haven't gotten worse than it was before. So if they were comfortable being in the city before, they could comfortable being in the city now. So it can be helpful as a question. So now that we've gone on narratives, hopefully I've sold you on this idea that narratives, that while they do have some benefits in the field of pursuing truth, they are not helpful. Now we're going to look at medical research and in medicine, and how we can model how medical research treats narratives as a way that we can implement those same defenses in our daily lives. So I'm going to go through some narrative spins that the medical community does encounter, But you'll notice that the medical community has these defenses to fight against these spins. So one spin is that my patients are different enough. So if you think about any kind of medical study, they're going to collect a bunch of patients, and it's important they're all patients of one type. They want to make sure that their patients are diverse enough, right? Now, the problem here is that selection bias might be invisible to the scientist that's choosing the patients to run that study on. And they might have very good intentions, but it doesn't prevent the fact that there is biased assignment. So the way to prevent that is by having completely randomized sample collection. If it's randomized, then we can protect against our inherent human biases. Another spin is I can tell when it's working, right? I'm seeing, all right, I'm treating patient A with something, with a treatment. I'm not treating patient B. Oh, looks like patient A is doing much better, right? Well, if they know that patient A is the one that's taking the treatment, that can impact how they are processing the results. That can impact how they're coming to their conclusion, and that can lead to faulty results. So as a result, there are the testing that takes place is double-blinded, meaning the people that are administering the test don't know which group has the treatment, and the people receiving the test don't know whether or not they have the treatment or not, right? So there's protection against that. And then another narrative spin. These patients improved after the treatment. Well, the problem is time heals, right? So people will generally improve after treatment. And also the placebo effect is not imaginary. We know the placebo effect is a very real thing. So to counteract this, control groups are created. And most of you probably understand this. If you're not familiar with the idea of a control group, it is a set of people that don't receive anything, right? So anything that you're seeing from them in terms of improvements, we know are a function of the placebo effect. So a final one here. This study proves our hypothesis. We did it. We performed the study. The treatments, they worked. So now we know we can move forward with this information. Well, this is about the pursuit of truth. And if it's really a truth, it should live out there in the universe. We should be able to access that truth again. So because we're always at the whim of a limited sample size, it's always good to have replication. So what you'll notice is, and I really love this about science, I'm passionate about it. Science utilizes a red team, blue team approach when it comes to validating results. By that, it means you have competing scientists, that when one scientist runs a particular experiment, this is not limited to the medical community, this is any kind of science. When one scientist comes up with a result, a meaningful result, a competing scientist will run an experiment, a similar experiment, because the scientist that publishes the result, they also publish how exactly they came to that result. And the reason they do that is because it shows that if somebody else were to follow the same protocol that I did, you should see the same thing. So those other scientists, the competing scientists, will do the same thing. And if it shows that, yes, I got the same results, that's what you see that becomes published. Another thing I want to point out here, and this is from the scientific community. So there's this concept of a p-value. This is going to be as technical as it gets. I mean, I'm saying in this talk, this is as technical as I'm going to get. So in any scientific experiment, it starts with a null hypothesis. So a null hypothesis is really a statement that encompasses our understanding as to how things are right now, right? So a classic example I like to give, let's say we're flipping a coin. The null hypothesis is that the coin is a fair coin. It's not weighted. I then can collect evidence to determine if an alternative hypothesis is supported enough to reject my null hypothesis. So if I suspect the coin might be weighted, my alternative hypothesis is that the coin is weighted. I can then run an experiment where I flip the coin and I log whether or not it landed on heads or tails, and I'm looking to see if there's enough evidence that disputes my null hypothesis. Now this becomes a matter of probability. Let's say I flip that coin 10 times and it lands on heads 6 times. We need a quantitative way to say, okay, well, is the coin weighted or not? I mean, if we didn't have a quantitative way, you could say, hey, look, it's supposed to be heads 5 of the 10 times. It was heads 6 of the 10 times. 60% is very different than 50%. If I went to the casino and I won 50-50 bets 60% of the time, I would be a very rich man, right? It's a meaningful difference. But we know the sample size is only 10. So how do we deal with this? Well, we have this value called a p-value. So p-value runs a specific statistical test. I'm not going to get into that, what the test is, but I can run a statistical test to say, what are the odds that my coin would land on heads 6 or more times if it was a fair coin? The probability that it would do that, meaning the probability that I would see my result, given that the null hypothesis is true, is the p-value. So it's the probability that my null hypothesis is true given the results. So generally, scientists, it's not as exciting when you fail to disprove a null hypothesis. Scientists kind of are hoping that the null hypothesis is disproven by the evidence, meaning smaller p-values are better. It means, oh, it's less likely that my null hypothesis is true. Now, in the scientific community, there's kind of a somewhat arbitrary line in the sand at a value of 0.05, meaning that if your p-value is greater than 0.05, the community will treat that result as you did not obtain sufficient enough evidence to dispute the null hypothesis. Doesn't mean you're definitely wrong. Might be worth doing again or having a slightly different experiment or gathering a larger sample. It just means that you haven't gotten there yet. Once you've gotten below 0.05, it's generally accepted. That's sometimes you'll see the word statistically significant. That's what they mean. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that 5% is actually a lot. So going back to this idea of red team, blue team, and I know that I wanted this to be 30 minutes, just about done. Imagine that we wanted to see whether or not people could predict the outcome of coin flips. And we went around the United States. There's 50 states in our country. So we got 50 different people. And you said, okay, we're going to flip a coin 100 times. Each flip, you're going to predict whether or not it's going to be heads or tails. Then we're going to look at the results. If we ran that, and then we ran p-values on each individual person, what you would have is between 2 and 3 people whose p-value were less than 0.05, right? Because we've got 50 trials. 0.05 means 1 out of 20 people by random chance will have something that is statistically significant. So that means we probably have 2 or 3 people that get below that number. Now, am I saying that, wow, that means those 2 or 3 people can definitely predict it? No, I'm making you aware of this kind of, you have to be skeptical sometimes. Just because it's below 0.05 doesn't mean it's true, but that's just kind of the line in the sand. But the point is we're able to control for the sample size. That's why we have it. And science uses this, and the medical community uses this to ensure that we get a large enough sample size to make sure we replicate things. So why does medicine have all of these defenses against narratives? And it's because of the cost. False positives, meaning if we have a result that we incorrectly implement into treatment, right? If they're not effective or they're harmful, can be catastrophic. We're talking about the loss of human life or drastically lowering the quality of people's lives. We don't want to do that, right? So the medical community will pay the price in poor health outcomes. And also, it is worth mentioning, there is extreme financial liability when incorrect conclusions are adopted. So as a result of both of those strong incentives, these high stakes force or incentivize the medical community to be extremely vigilant when it comes to treating a hypothesis as actionable intelligence. It wants to make sure that it is, when there's a possible narrative, it fights against those narratives to ensure that we're truly on the pursuit of truth. So I'm going to end with this. Analytics and narratives, they can coexist. Narratives are wonderful tools for helping us feel better amid life's ups and downs. They can inspire potentially helpful questions, right? Have things gotten bad in Chicago? Is it better to invest in the market if it's a bear market? These are helpful questions, right? It gets us closer to truth, but they're not enough to provide the answer. Analytics is there to predict the future. Its sole currency is truth. I'm not saying that if analytics pumps something out, it's definitely true, but it's trying to be true. It's not paying attention to emotion. And so if you find yourself providing a narrative, determine if you're operating in a spectrum of emotion or if you're operating in a spectrum of truth. And if you're operating in a spectrum of truth, you want to make sure you reframe that narrative as being a question or provide more data to back it up. And now this is what I'm going to leave you with. The medical community is extremely vigilant about defending against narratives to make sure that they don't contaminate their scientific process of obtaining truth. Why should you care any less about that than the medical community? Your life is important, whether it's your business, your physical health, your relationships, your quality of life. all aspects of your life are extremely important. You should be vigilant as well when you are looking at pursuing truth to ensuring that narratives aren't contaminating your decision-making process. So don't fall victim to that primal human itch that will always be there, which is to have an explanation in the absence of knowledge. When you're in the spectrum of truth, it is vital that you sit and be vigilant in that absence of knowledge until the evidence has given you sufficient information to justify implementing a conclusion. Because if you don't do that, it will hurt you and it will get in the way of being more productive and living longer and living a higher quality of life, which is what we're trying to do in the Transhumanist Party. So with that, I will open it up to any questions.
Yes, thank you very much, David, for that highly informative and engaging presentation. And it's interesting, we had a comment before you mentioned it that you should be a professor, and in fact you do teach a data science course for MIT, so you are applying your presentation skills to help the next generation of students understand these insights. And our friend Jan Tabenau writes that you are a very engaging presenter. Daniel Tweet writes, narratives are kind of like Richard Feynman's warning about you must not fool yourself because you are the easiest person to fool. On the other hand, he also thinks narratives like money should be considered a tool. And I'm curious to explore more to what extent narratives can be a tool. Now, one effective approach that you mentioned is to turn narratives into questions so that then they can be subjected to more rigorous testing. And I agree with that. I'm curious also if you think narratives can be effective memory aids. You mentioned that people's memories form more readily when they tell themselves stories. And indeed, the older I become, the more it seems I need to rely on that, because as a kid, as a teenager, I had a very good memory. I think you can attest to that as well. Now, it's interesting because the older I become, the more I need to essentially encapsulate what I know into stories or narratives in order to remember it more effectively. And I don't think it's entirely the result of aging. I think it's also the result of just the overwhelming number of facts that we are met with in our day-to-day experience. Whereas, say, when I was 5 years old, I could convincingly, at least for myself, say, well, I know all the planets of the solar system. I know the names of the numbers up to one Google. I know the countries of the world and their capitals. I can identify their flags. So I thought I know everything because that was the universe of knowledge that was disclosed to me and available to me. And I had memorized it. I had memorized laundry lists of facts. Now, over time, that approach to essentially ingest laundry lists of facts and be able to repeat them gets replaced by more conceptual frameworks. And those conceptual frameworks are narratives until you get to a point in your life where there are just way too many facts to memorize. So you need stories to make sense of them. But would you say there are better or worse ways to use such stories when it comes to even aiding one's own memory?
Yes, that's a great point. So I think you basically answered the question that I would. Narratives can absolutely be a tool. They can be beneficial. You're 100% accurate in that. I read a book, and I forgot what book it was, to be honest. I feel kind of bad about that. There was a book that talked I remember what it was. It was called Peak. Forgot the author. Sorry. Peak was about the science of getting good at something. And one of the groups that it talked about were the people that extended their memory. They literally compete in memory competitions. And the way that they remember these long sequences is by using narratives to connect them. So the way I want to connect that to what I mentioned during the presentation is that you want to be clear as to what your objective is. If your objective is to help to remember something, then narratives are fine. I'm saying that narratives are harmful when you are trying to pursue truth, or as you're trying to pursue truth, because narratives are not, now they are helpful as questions in that realm. So one thing, and this is what I tell like the MIT students, analytics is the process of moving from a question to an answer, but notice that the starting point is the question, right? So if you're asking a question that isn't helpful, if you're asking a question where even getting an answer to that would not be very helpful, it's not going to be as useful. You can have the correct answer. It doesn't help you too much. Having very meaningful questions can lead to better outcomes. So I'll give an example in business, just because I'm used to giving examples like that. Let's go back to that marketing campaign example. If I ask the question, given a certain marketing campaign, how many people can I expect to come to my website? A better question would be, of a number of marketing campaigns, which would provide the higher return on investment, right? Because one of them is like, okay, great. If I told you that 50 people are going to go to your website if you go to marketing campaign A, that's not really enough to know whether or not you should do it. What do we care about? We care about making money in that context, right? So you want to make sure that you know the lane that narrative is in. Now, one thing I would like to do, because I'm looking at some of the comments and I'm very passionate about this, if it's okay with you, there are some people saying that science cannot explain everything, and science does not know everything. And I'd love to address that if you is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. So, some people say out there, they're saying that science cannot explain everything, and that science can be wrong. So I want to dispute those, but in a very specific way. I don't think anybody is suggesting that science can explain everything, and science cannot be wrong. And here's what I mean by that. Science is a process. Science was not invented by people. Science is a process by which evidence is collected to pursue truth, to identify what is actually happening. So you can engage in the scientific process. And by the way, not only has this happened, we assume this is going to happen. This is how we evolve and how we accumulate knowledge, is we assume that science is going to come up with conclusions that aren't sufficient, or they might be incorrect. That's why there are competing scientists. So the idea that when there's a publication on any topic, it means that science is making a declaration that something is happening, that is not the correct framing. Science is the process that is outputting a specific conclusion. But one thing that all scientists, if they're, all might be an extreme, but the vast majority of scientists, if they're being honest or if they're a good scientist, will acknowledge that any scientific conclusion is not the end of the path. If you look up any scientific paper, and I mean any scientific paper, you will find a large number of references, which means that scientific result stemmed from a previous result that took place. You will also find that if you wait a month, you will have other scientific papers that are built off of what that scientific paper had come up with. Also, it's very common and encouraged that in the field of science, you have multiple ideas, so you can have multiple publications that can output the same thing. I'll give you just a great idea, and I'm not that well versed in this. I just know that this dispute exists. I've heard that eggs are good for you, and I've heard that eggs are terrible for you, and I hear it back and forth all the time. Those conclusions are both coming from science. There is some evidence that's collected. There's a conclusion that's being output. The reason that it continues to be debated is because science is a never-ending process of collecting evidence, testing hypotheses, and coming up with conclusions that are more data-driven. And as more time goes by, the more evidence that we have. So science can't be wrong because it's only the process of using logic and data to try to improve on our understanding. So hopefully, and I'm hoping I'm not attacking anything. I'm not attacking, I'm not attacking religion. And what I think is kind of funny is that Gennady earlier in this talk alluded to the fact that one of the earliest recordings of us, or Gennady's digital presence, was from a conversation we had when we were 14 or 16, I think. And coincidentally enough, I think the conversation was about this topic. So I thought it was kind of interesting to bring it up. So there are other some comments pouring in here. So I want to let you, I don't want to just be going back and forth with the comment section. So Gennady, it's your show. I want to let you kind of guide where you'd like this conversation to go from here.
Absolutely. And thank you for that response in regard to the question of what can science actually tell us, and the fact that science is a process rather than a set of answers, though there are certain answers that the process can converge upon, like we know that planets follow elliptical orbits around their respective stars, and that would be extraordinarily difficult to disprove unless you have some very unusual star system. Like if you could conceivably have multiple stars of a binary star system, maybe the orbits will be different, but nonetheless, there has been a robust body of scientific research to indicate that planets follow elliptical orbits, and we can generally rely on that conclusion. Now, Mike Lazine writes that you are right on point. There are some scientists who do act like when they find something that is the end of the discussion. I think, though, that that may be less a feature of how scientists act. That may be more a feature of how certain people who create narratives that they allege are related to science will act. So sometimes politicians will say, well, this is the established science, whatever it may be. And maybe the science has more exploration to do, more hypothesis testing to do. And that doesn't mean that there are no conclusions from the science that can't be relied upon for practical purposes, but it does mean that there can always be more studies performed, more research done, more exploration that could potentially lead us to revisit prior conclusions.
Yes, and I just want to kind of build on that. So there's this concept of incremental growth. We are on this incremental path to obtain all of the knowledge of the universe. I'm not suggesting we'll ever have that. If they say the science is saying this, I don't think it's either extreme. They're not saying that it's meaningless because it could be disproven in 5 minutes. I also don't think they're saying this is it, we're done, we found it. I think they're basically saying this is what we have right now. This is our best understanding. Not to say it can't be improved upon, not to say that it's not, it might be incorrect, but it's our best understanding as of right now. And all we can do is operate off of the information that is available to us. And I think it should be treated with that level of nuance where now, as you can tell, like I'm very passionate about science. I think science is a great way to follow for us to get to a place of a better life. And I think too often we rely on narratives, we rely on emotions to choose what we should be listening to instead of just trying to obtain objective truth.
Yes, absolutely. And also in terms of the scientific process, I wonder if you would agree that there could be different degrees of acceptable statistical significance depending on what problem you're trying to solve. So if it's in regard to a medical treatment, whether a medical treatment actually is more effective than a placebo, one would want to have a rather low p-value, maybe even a p-value less than 0.05 in many cases, if there really is a risk of, say, some serious adverse side effects stemming from that treatment. On the other hand, let's say you're in a business context and your objective is to determine, do green widgets sell better than other colors of widgets? And you run a test of that hypothesis and you have a p-value of, say, 0.2. Now, 0.2 wouldn't meet the test of statistical significance in most cases, but would it still be actionable for the business person to decide, oh, I should probably invest more in producing green widgets because I'm not 100% sure. Indeed, I am 20% not sure that they will sell better than other colors of widgets, but still, I'll take my chances and try to sell some green widgets, because in 4 out of 5 scenarios, I'm going to earn a greater profit doing that?
Sure, that's a great question. So the short answer to your question is that if the p-value is greater than 0.05, especially like 0.2, like you mentioned, I actually would not go along with it. And here's why. Let's say we're doing a simple linear regression where you're saying, I'm trying to see the relationship between investing in this marketing campaign and my sales growth, right? I want to make sure that I'm selling more because I'm investing in this marketing campaign. If your p-value, well, actually, no, I take that back. That's not a good example, because what you're pointing out, it's a good question, is if it's in an area that is, I'll use the stock market. You're saying if it's an area that's very unpredictable, shouldn't it be okay if there is some element of uncertainty there, right? And you're right, but that would manifest itself in a different way. So let's say, and this is going to sound kind of silly. Oh, let me make it not sound silly. Let's say I'm trying to make a model that's going to predict what the stock market's going to do tomorrow. And my model is going to take as input what the stock market did yesterday. I'll just keep it really simple, okay? If I were to run a statistical test on that, the p-value would probably be pretty low. I think it would kind of meet these criteria. It would be pretty low, but it wouldn't be, probably wouldn't be below 0.05. It might be something like 0.2, right? Now, having some uncertainty is important, but it should not be above 0.05 if we're only looking at the relationships between variables, right? So a different way that we can look at uncertainty is there's something called an R-squared value. So an R-squared value is telling us how well our model explains the variance that we see in the variables that we're looking at. So if our model can explain 35% of the variance that we see in a realm that's very hard to predict, then to your point, a 35% R-squared value might be high enough. Like, look, this is an incredibly difficult thing to predict. I'm able to remove 35% of the uncertainty, right, given the relationship between these variables. The other way you can kind of map that out is you should have an out-of-sample data set. So by that, I mean when any model is trained, that means that you're feeding in actual labeled data to it, not any model, but a supervised machine learning model, which is what most models are. When you're teaching a model to be good, that means it has to have an answer key first to know what is good and what is bad, right? So then it will morph itself so it does as well as it possibly can on that data set. But then when you're using it, you're feeding it blind data or data from the future, because we don't know what it is, right? So I get a data point as to what's happening in the market today, and now my model is going to try and predict what's going to happen. My model doesn't know what's going to happen because nobody knows what's going to happen. So the model will pump something out. So when you're training a model, you want to have out of sample data, because that out of sample data, meaning data that the model has never seen before, the model has the same relationship with that out of sample data as it does with future data, and then it doesn't know what it is. So my model might do fantastically on training data. If it does horribly on out of sample data, I can trust it will do horribly on future data. If it does decently on out of sample data, then I can say, okay, well, probably will do decently well on future data. So that's a long way of saying, if I test that model on out of sample data, I can measure, was I able to make money with this model on the out of sample data? It's possible the R-squared value can be 0.35, and I made money with it because 35% is a lot. Going back to your p-value example, if we were to look at the p-values of the x variable, which is in this case I'm saying is what the market did the day before, that p-value, I don't think you're getting to an R-squared value of 0.35 without the p-value being below 0.05. So the way that p-value manifests itself is that it wouldn't have that much of an impact. And what is taught to analytics professionals is that if you see a variable whose p-value is inflated, you probably want to leave it out because it's not a strong enough relationship. Because you should expect a because you understand it's two separate questions, right? Whether or not an X variable impacts a Y variable is a separate question of, can I model it efficiently, right? Especially with the right kind of model. So when you're building a Y equals MX plus B model, right? It's linear. There are some relationships that are nonlinear. So imagine that you see, what's a good example? If you see like if you see kind of four circles like this, right? that seems like something that's modelable, right? It's a very distinct shape. If I gave you an X variable, you'd be able to pinpoint, like, all right, I'm pretty sure that you're going to see a point here and here, right? If you were to write a linear model around that, it would have no idea what's happening. So you can have relationships that are meaningful. That doesn't necessarily mean the p-value is going to be there. And if the p-value is not there, that means your model probably isn't effective. So that's a long way of saying I do think that your p-values should have to be low, regardless of how uncertain the relationships are, or uncertain what you're trying to predict. I am not saying, however, that every single evaluation metric needs to be extremely high, like I need an R-squared value of 0.9 if it's something that's more difficult to be predicted.
Yes, thank you for that answer. And indeed, it seems like in many situations, we could be more forgiving of a lower R-squared value than of a higher p-value. But I appreciate the rigor in insisting that the p-values should be below 0.05. Now, I'm also curious as to your assessment of the relative merits and perhaps some of the disadvantages or challenges of the various types of predictive models that are available today. As you mentioned, they range from simple linear regression models, which may fail to capture nonlinear trends, to AI models with potentially billions of variables, which could be very precise, but sometimes they may seem like a black box to a lot of people because the inner workings are not as transparent. And also there could be skepticism, at least in certain designs of models, like large language models, of hallucinations. So the model may be outputting something that seems very precise, that seems very cogent, but it could still be false because of some artifact of how the model operates. And then there are models that are in between. So there are generalized linear models, for instance. There are decision tree-based models, which are more complex. They may have thousands of trees of various shapes that may not be intuitively understandable anymore. So it seems to me there's this trade-off between transparency, understandability on the one hand, and then preciseness, ability to model very complex relationships on the other hand, but you lose a certain degree of transparency along the way. Is there, let's say, some sort of golden mean, or is there a way to utilize each model appropriately that you don't have as many of the drawbacks?
So that's an excellent question. Given that we're in 2026, this is the kind of question that 150 years, 300, 500 years from now, they're going to look back and they're going to say, yeah, people did not know, understandably, how to deal with this the fact that we've built these models that are good. They can, not every single instance, but they can provide a lot of value. But the problem is we can't interpret them. So, all right, let's say we're talking about an insurance rate for somebody, okay? Oftentimes, and I'm not the expert on this, I can think of somebody who is, if we're looking at what someone's insurance rate should be, you can understand if someone applies a linear model, right? Let's say I go out to get car insurance and they say, okay, number one, you're male, so your car insurance rate's going to go up a little bit, okay? Number two, I'm 39. So my car insurance rate is going to be at some level because I'm 39. I'm married. Maybe that means it goes down a little bit. They might look at my FICO score. That means, my FICO score is, whatever it is, it's going to impact what the insurance rate's going to be, right? So that makes sense to us. So if you look at someone's looking at their insurance rate, they say, oh, big charge, whatever, it's $85 a month. They can look at those different variables, or the person that's applying the charge can look at those variables and understand where the number's coming from. Why is a house cost as much as it does? Oh, I get it. It's got this many bedrooms. It's this many square feet. It lives in this town, right? You've got these different parameters that we can wrap our heads around. When you feed a picture of a panda into a model, and the model's able to correctly classify that it's a panda. Now let's put aside any concern that it's wrong. Let's just assume, for the sake of this conversation, that the model is 100% accurate. It can recognize what a panda looks like. We can't wrap our minds around how it knows it's a panda. You can't even print it out. It's not going to say, all right, well, it's got 2 ears and its face is white, so it's got to be a panda, right? You can't even look at it. I mean that, like, you could print out the series of numbers. I could say, hey, here's all the parameters. Here's it's got these. I'm not going to even go into it. I know how it works, but it's very complex, and I don't think your audience would appreciate it. The numbers would mean nothing to you. So we've got these models that they work, but it's kind of like, I don't know how it works, but we know that it works because, and this is what a lot of people don't understand about AI. AI looks intelligent, and the abilities that these models have are fantastic, and it absolutely mimics intelligence. But I think it's really funny about AI is the way that these models have come about is through trial and error. So I want you to think about that for a second. I want your audience to really think about when I say it's through trial and error. Imagine that you want to go from your house to the airport, wherever you live, and you want to figure out what's the best way to get there. The way that you're probably going to try to get there is you get in your car, if you have a car, and you kind of start driving in the direction, right? And maybe you time how long it takes. Then if you get stuck in traffic or there's some stoplights, you think, okay, next time, instead of going left here, I'm going to go right here, but I should get a little bit closer. The way that models get there is if the airport is west of you, the model might start going east. It might start going a completely different direction. So you see it walk out the door, you're like, hey, where the heck are you going? Like, Olympus is that way, right? So like the airport's in the complete other direction. So what it does is it says, you know what? It took me 45 years to drive to the airport. I simulated the distance. And instead of driving west 10 minutes, I drove east and I hit the ocean. And then I drove around a while. It took me 45 years. So I'm going to try doing that again. This time I'm going to go south. And if you were watching, you'd say, oh my, why are you going south? The airport is west, right? What you're not seeing is each one of those iterations takes a microsecond. So it's able to go through these billions of different combinations. And then when you're seeing the end result, you're saying, oh my God, look at how brilliant this thing is. It knew, not only did it know to go west, it took this other side road that I didn't even know existed, and it made it to the airport 5 minutes faster than I ever have. And I've lived here for 15 years. This model's amazing. Like, yes, that's amazing that it came up with that route. Yes, the application is fantastic. And it came up with that conclusion in maybe like 2 seconds or something. But what you're not seeing is the methodology of getting there is like, apologize for not having a better word. It's a stupid methodology. Like, that's the best way we have of going about it right now, which is say, all right, we're just going to keep doing it as much as we can. Now, there is something called gradient descent, which means that it doesn't just randomly try different things. It will alter what it's trying based off of the result of the previous iteration, but it's still just iterating over and over again. And it's just doing that through brute force, as somebody mentioned in there. So I think that that's a really important concept because we're coming up with this just like raw trial and error. That does not mean that these computers have this fantastic understanding of the different use cases that we have. So given that, I think that was kind of a long, I didn't mean to go on about that, but I think the short answer to the question is kind of, we have to make sure that we're using models, that we're applying them in the right way. It's important that we monitor how accurate are the models that we're using, right? And make sure that it's keeping up. Another thing we have to be very, very careful about is we want to be aware of the data that our models are constructed off of. As an example, a lot of the models that we have on images are images that are from the United States. So if you're not aware, most people in the world live in Asia. So the models actually are biased, not because there's any intention behind it, but if the models are fed images of people from the United States, that means that the models might not be as accurate on people that are Asian because it hasn't been trained on that. Now that's not fair to them, right? So no matter what it is that we're looking at, if the model is disproportionately accurate with different groups of people, now that can start to be that can become harmful. We don't mean that. I'm not suggesting that the people training the models were racist or anything. It's just like a natural consequence of feeding it a selective amount of data. And the more we lean on these models, the more important it is that we are not doing any unintentional harm to groups because of that. That also takes place in medicine, by the way. Let's say that we feed in medical data into a model to predict what's going to happen. Well, there's a lot of people that aren't feeding in their medical data because maybe they don't live near a hospital. Maybe they can't afford to go to a hospital, right? So those people's patient information isn't being fed into the system. So if you've got a system that's supposed to be able to take in, let's say, a different medical attributes or biological attributes and pump out a diagnosis, I think we can all agree that it's not fair if your skin color is one thing, that the model is good at predicting what the medical diagnosis is, but if your skin color is another, then it's not. So learning how to do this and applying these models in situations, it's definitely helpful. And I'm also giving the model builders the benefit of the doubt when it comes to intention. But when it comes to like the challenges of how we handle this moving forward, this is really like we have this amazing thing. And frankly, the value that it provides is too much. It's too much to say, we're not going to use AI models right now until we figured it out. So we're going to go back to the way it was. It's too late to do that. It's providing too much economic value. So we have to kind of figure out as we go, how do we deal with the fact that we don't understand when we cannot, frankly, understand where these models parameters are coming from, right? We just, how does it know it's a panda? And we want to have better processes and more standardization around ensuring that we're not discriminating against any groups of people, whether intentional or not, when we're constructing these models and utilizing these models.
Yes, thank you for that response. And you actually have an episode of Profit as a Science where you go through essentially a hypothetical example of testing for whether a particular practice, this is a hiring practice in a business, might be unintentionally discriminatory. So there are data analysis tools that are geared toward this. But to your point, it's interesting to consider essentially how the data that one analyzes are compiled, what elements are included, what elements might not be included, and to what extent, if certain data elements are not included, could there be ways to supplement those, say through the lived experiences of patients? Let's say a patient is not in a demographic group whose experiences are commonly captured by data, and maybe there should be ways to collect those experiences, but that patient will relate something to a physician or to a researcher, some sort of fact. Could there be a way to make sure that that's taken into consideration, because that might make the difference for that patient in terms of attaining a superior medical outcome?
Yeah, so there are different ways to kind of address for this issue. So one is, I mean, the simplest, shouldn't say the easiest. The simplest way is just collect more data, right? Just try to get more patients, try to get their information in there. One way you can kind of synthetically create more data is you can just replicate some of the data that you have originally with those groups. So if I have one person from group A and I've got 5 people from group B, I can just have more replication of people from group A. Now, I'm not saying one person, right? But I'm saying like if I've got 5 times as big with another group, I can either leave out 80%, I can randomly select 20% from that first group, so that way, you know, they're about equal, or I can replicate what's happening in the first group. Another thing that you can do is there's a difference sometimes with these models. There's a difference between predicting what's going to happen and what the actual actionable intelligence would be. So an example of this would be, let's say you have a model that's predicting, and we actually go over this example in the MIT course. Let's say we have a model that's predicting whether or not someone's going to default on a loan. And the model thinks that one gender is more likely going to default on the loan than the other one, right? Let's say that's what the data says. I think we can all agree that it's not fair if the model is like pumping this out, that we have this bias present that's in the model, and so therefore like the outcomes are the same. But we can alter though are the thresholds. So a model like that is going to predict a probability that someone's going to default on a loan. So if the gender that generally is thought to default on a loan more has a what I'm trying to say, a higher threshold with which you'd reject them, you can then normalize how often the loans are being granted out, right? So you can say, okay, so I'm not going to say which gender is which. I don't want to get anybody upset. If one gender, you say if there's a 20% chance they're going to default on the loan or higher, we're not going to give them the loan. On the other gender, we say if there's a 16% chance they default on the loan or higher, we're not going to give them. You can alter those thresholds so the actual outcome is equalized, even if the model itself is still reflects that bias.
Yes, thank you very much for that answer. And yes, it's encouraging that there are data analysis techniques that would allow for consideration of such biases and their mitigation. Our viewer GS422 recommends the book Invisible Women, which highlights statistical bias. And here's the link to the book on Amazon. It's a book by Caroline Criado Perez. So thank you for that recommendation. Now, another aspect of your comments, how AI systems today essentially work by brute forcing a solution through trial and error of numerous iterations. It's just each iteration takes a fraction of a second to perform. It reminds me of this paper. This was a landmark paper in 2017 called Attention is All You Need, which essentially launched this revolution of large language models, generative AI models, and within the ensuing 5 years, those models, by having access to more computing resources, essentially were able to generate outcomes and solutions that a lot of people found plausible, either visually or in terms of the text they received as responses to their inquiries. But that gives rise to a question that's commonly posed in the transhumanist realm, and that is, when do you think artificial superintelligence, or ASI, will arrive? This is from our viewer Mike Lazine. So if the way current AI systems work is essentially by brute forcing a solution, is that enough to get to superhuman capabilities, not just in one field, but more generally across a variety of fields, across essentially the full array of fields that humans would be involved in, except to be even better than the best humans are? Or do you think there's an inherent limitation to that architecture of AI, to how far it can advance, to the quality of the answers it could give us? Is there still some human edge that will be needed to supplement these models or interpret them? Or are they just bounded by the sum total of accumulated human data and experience? And if you don't have data or experience in certain realms, then they can't surpass the collective attainments of humankind.
So that's a very big question. So first, I'm going to operate when you say artificial superintelligence. I'm assuming you mean kind of imagine one model that is kind of all-knowing in every single realm. I would say one of the things you're going to run into, and I'm going to go back to a point that I brought up during my talk. Every single model needs to have a single optimization metric. And I think you're always going to need a person. You're always going to need a person to choose what the proper optimization metric is for a given point in time. And let me just go back to like a really basic example. You're trying to launch a business. When you're trying to launch your business, your first step is probably not to maximize your profit, right? First, you're also probably not even trying to minimize your costs. You're probably just trying to maximize your revenue, right? You want to get people invested in whatever your product or service is. You want to get loyal customers, right? You want to build from there. It's okay if you're not making money to start, right? You also are not operating off of economies of scale. So your raw cost per unit is probably going to be the highest it's ever going to be, right? So you're operating off of this. At some point, you shift from being focused on revenue to saying, okay, now my revenue is fine. I want to make more profit. So you shift to going into profit. When you choose to do that is something that within a given model is going to be outside of its scope. Another thing to really consider, and we're just on the the edge of this, and not in a good way. We've got these models that provide, and I'll just speak from personal experience. So I use chatbots in my work. So I build machine learning algorithms. I built a program this past year in a programming language that I had never spoken before. Now, this is a fully functioning program. I built it in less than a year. It launched 2 months ago. There is no way I would have even accepted the project, let alone built it, if it weren't for AI chatbots. Now, personally or professionally, I used it for education. I didn't say, hey, build me this. I said, okay, I don't know how to, import a library in this new programming language. I was able to learn it through an infinite feedback loop. If you were to put a dollar value as to how much it would cost me to have somebody that knew the programming language to the level that the chatbot knew the programming language and have them in my office ready 24/7. If I couldn't sleep and I was up at 1 a.m. and I say, hey, how do I make a variable do this? And they say, oh, here's how you do it. That would cost me tens, if not like $100,000 a year. I got access to that tool pretty much for free. So you could put a dollar value, and now this is anecdotal, but this is pretty sure this is valid worldwide. The value that this is providing me, the economic value it's providing me. So on one hand, you've got this amazing thing that's providing all this economic value. The downside is this is going to eat a lot of jobs, right? And so if we probably don't want to go into a society that, even though it is economically beneficial, and I'm not going to get political. I'm really not trying to do that. The object of the game might not be to be as economically as productive as possible. We also might want to have our civilization, right? Our private citizens be at a place where they have a purpose and they have a function. So if I were to say, Gennady, guess what? I've done it. I did it. I built it. The super intelligence, it can do everything. We have no need for accountants. We have no need for lawyers. We have no need for doctors. We have no need for any of this thing. You feed whatever you want into my model. I'll make it available to you for free. You're going to put a lot of people out of work, right? And I don't think we like the idea of just handing out money for free. Another thing I will point out is that people need purpose. And I think purpose, it matters. So I do think these AI models are going to grow. I do think it's going to eat jobs. I'm even kind of taking away that I'm not even going to make a statement as to whether or not that's obviously it's bad that jobs are being taken. I'm not saying that means that the AI models shouldn't be implemented. I'm just being realistic as to what the downsides are of implementing this AI. So you've kind of defined this end of the spectrum where we have this massive, super intelligent algorithm that's able to handle everything. It's able to dispatch its robots to do construction on your house. It's going to be perfect. Okay, that may be the case. So if you're living on the world by yourself, right, and you've got all the money you could ever want, then yeah, you don't have to pay anybody anything because you can just use this model to do everything. But we have to, and I mean this as a question. I don't mean to rhetorically answer it. Is that what we want? Like, we have to define what good looks like. And I'll give my opinion because I think that it sounds like with your audience, like you'll vibe with this. I feel very passionately about the pursuit of science, right? Now, science is all about testing what we don't know, right? It's coming up with a question we don't have the answer to. Now, you said yourself that models, a lot of times they hallucinate. Models are trained. They're trained off of previous information. I don't think models make for great scientists because how can a model really learn new information? Now, maybe at some point it can get there. But again, we have to be the ones to decide what are those questions that we want to be asking, right? So given that I think your audience and you are interested in how do we progress our civilization so we have a better chance of evading our own destruction, right? So this includes colonizing other planets, right? So we can, what do we do at some point? And I won't go extreme here, right? It's fun to talk about. The sun's gonna explode at some point. It's gonna swallow up the entire solar system. And we've got time, but it's gonna happen. Can we get ourselves off our planet somewhere else to ensure that we can keep living? The universe might collapse at some point, right? There's different thoughts about that. Some is that it's always expanding. It might expand and then at some point come back, right? Can we counteract that? I mean, it sounds insane, but hey, we can divert an asteroid. That sounded pretty insane a couple hundred years ago. To answer these questions, we have to progress scientifically. And to progress scientifically, we have to have all of our needs met. That means that we have to have our children be educated. That means we have to have food to eat. That means we need to be taken care of. That means we need to be able to operate in the society. And for all those things to happen, to take it back to one of my very first points, I think we need people to be happy. And so I think we have to balance those things. And one of the things I mentioned is that these models operate off of singular optimization metrics. I don't think that superintelligence is going to be good at balancing. It's going to say, okay, here's the best way to do it. And what is best will be shifting. And so, like, for that reason, I guess the short answer is that I don't think we're going to get there, not because we can't, but I think we shouldn't get it to that level, because I think we shouldn't, because I think it would take away from what we're trying to work towards.
Yes, thank you for that response. And indeed, this area is a conundrum for a lot of transhumanists, because we are trying to reach the best possible outcomes for humanity and the advancement of human civilization. And Daniel Tweed writes, every human now alive actually has a new job, keeping civilization human or humane. And the vision you articulated, that perhaps all humans should become scientists in their outlook, that they should be the ones to ask the questions, the ones to pose the hypotheses, the ones to direct the AI systems to the extent that they can help in testing those hypotheses. But humans do need to be the ones to set the objectives, to determine what a good answer is, what a meaningful answer is. And you mentioned meaning and purpose. It's interesting too, our friend More Life Please, John H. writes, purpose, yes, but perhaps we need to disambiguate our sense of purpose from what we do to make a living. And I think right now, for a lot of people, their purpose is tied up with their jobs. And on the one hand, that motivates them to acquire resources that help them lead better lives. But what if we do reach a society where the material prerequisites of living are fulfilled for the vast majority of people? Then I think people will still need a sense of purpose, but answering these greater civilizational questions, or even cosmic scale questions that will determine whether our species survives into the long-term future, that could be a great motivator. That could be a great sense of purpose for humans, aided by AI and robots and other kinds of machines that we come up with.
Yes, I agree. So I just want to speak to a couple points. So the first thing I want to respond to is that the reason I'm equating purpose with jobs is I'm assuming that people won't be given money. So if you're saying that, look, we've built this model that can handle every aspect of society, including farming, right? Which means that nobody has to worry about money anymore. Okay? You don't have to worry about food. You don't have to worry about your house. We're so efficient that you don't have to make money. You can live fine. Then I totally agree with you. Yes. And I'm not saying that like I support that or not. I'm trying not to be super political. I totally agree with you that then, yeah, your purpose can be around like being a good father, being a good husband, being a good friend, right? Helping your community. More power to you. I'm operating off of the assumption that generally we're not close to the idea that people are just going to be like handed out enough money so they can do whatever they want to, which means that people will need a way to make money. They will need something to do in society so they can pay for themselves. So I'm going to use that as a bridge. Would it be okay if I responded to something that I saw in the comments? So
yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I saw somebody write that it doesn't make sense to operate the economy less efficiently for a sense of purpose. And I want to push back on that. Now, on one hand, I want to say I'm going to give an extreme, but on the other hand, this whole conversation is talking about an extreme. We're talking about this like massive super intelligence. There's no need for jobs anymore. So we're already there. Let's say there was one person that was able to write this thing, and they were able to generate trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of wealth, right? Because they could provide everything to everyone, right? But the problem was they took all the jobs, and I mean all the jobs. No doctors, no teachers, no lawyers, no accountants, no contractors, everything. So assuming that we're not just handing out money, do you think that that person would want to live in a world where every single other person is starving and is desperate to survive and is probably going to be pounding at the gate because they're desperate, right? In other words, we're talking about extremes. I don't think it makes sense if we're there, that we're generating that much wealth and we're that efficient. Is it worth going from here to here if it means putting billions of people out of work? I mean, because that's what we're talking about. If jobs are done to provide what we need. No, jobs are done to provide what the person with money needs. Because if you don't have money, how are you going to do it? Because no matter what that algorithm is doing, again, assuming that it's not for free, you need a doctor, you need a lawyer, right? You need all of these things. So if everything is provided, it's provided if you have the money. So again, if it's provided for free, then I agree with you. But until we're there, I think people need a purpose, and more specifically, people need a way to both provide value and get money for themselves. And I'm saying there is economic value, by the way, to a person making money and being a happy, productive member of society. A desperate person will be a weight on the system. They're more likely going to commit crimes. They're more likely going to have negative health outcomes, which is going to be a tax on like our health system, right? And that's aside anything talking about religious as to like, do we want to be humane to other people? Do we want other people to suffer? I'm putting that aside. If you made it a math problem, if someone is like, if you gave someone some money, just like flat out gave them money, but it meant that they were more likely going to be happy and productive, it's worth giving them that money because it's better than the alternative, right? There's not this false choice that a person can just have nothing and have no purpose. And by the way, it's not going to cost us anything. There's still going to be an economic cost. So the question is it better to be economically less efficient, and provide them with something? Or is it better to be economically more efficient, but now have this person be a weight on the system? Now, do I know the specific answer to that question? I'm not sure. Like, obviously it depends like on the person, but I am saying that it's very dependent on whether or not that person is provided for. And we have to consider what is the economic cost. I'm not even making a humane argument. What's the economic cost of having people that are desperate? And that really ties into our conversation. I'm not even talking about a super intelligence. We're talking about AI that's going to take a ton of jobs, right? It's fantastic because of the economic value, but we do need to be careful about how we're balancing what negative impact is this going to have on society. Is it good that we have all these people out of work? I'm not advocating for one thing or another. I am advocating that we ask the question, right? So we can get at what is the best way we can go about this, because right now we don't know the answer.
Yes, and I think it is important to ask the question, if I were the person who developed the artificial superintelligence in this hypothetical scenario that would have this effect, I would consider it to be in my rational self-interest to essentially give other people enough so that they would not even object to the arrival of that artificial superintelligence. So they would have a standard of living higher than they would have had previously, in what economists would call a Pareto efficient move. So a Pareto efficient move is a move that benefits at least one person and doesn't disadvantage any others. But hypothetically, if you have some engine of great wealth generation, it should be possible under some system, under some framework, to ensure that everybody benefits from it, that those who would be in the default state of things net losers from it because they're displaced from their jobs or they're otherwise unable to earn an income, they could be compensated to some extent that at least makes them similarly better off to what they were before. The question is, what's the kind of political arrangement that could make it happen? Is there a will within the society to make it happen? What are the logistical difficulties of making it happen? AI might help with that. So those are all fascinating questions to address. There is, of course, a popular science fiction series that does address it, and that is Star Trek. Mike Lezine mentions it. So the Star Trek economy is one where you have replicators to create essentially small-scale objects, food items, or personal property types of items for people to utilize, but people still have meaning and purpose because they go off and join Starfleet and explore other worlds and meet new civilizations. And there is this sense of meaning that people find through essentially the kind of mentality that you mentioned, scientific discovery oriented mentality. So hopefully we can have that kind of future. Now, we have our friend Zach Varkaris here from Austin Biotech, and he has been listening to the conversation on YouTube as well. So he has a question for David about the human condition and economics. So Zach, please go ahead.
Thanks, Gennady. And hi, David. Unfortunately, my camera's not working very clearly. So, question, I've been listening to what you're saying, and I think it's ironic with a name like Primer, and you work with numbers. I think it's quite amusing. Prime and numbers, I think it's quite amusing. But that's neither here nor there. But there's a lot to be said in the name. But the thing I was going to ask you was this. I listened to a lot of what you say. I'm a little bit of an amateur statistician myself, a little bit. But the thing is that we talk about economic value, and you rightly point out, if someone made trillions of dollars, do you think that some of our scions of the tech industry today would actually give up their power and their wealth if they had it? And the answer, we know what the answer is, and it's two letters, it's not three, right? So the reality is that the human condition is that how many times in history has someone created a lot of power and then given it away? I mean, I'm just giving you two very top line ones. One is a guy called Cincinnatus. He was a Roman senator who took power and then gave it away and went back to his farm. Another one, more closely to our time, is a guy called President Polk. He said, "I'm going to get the West and then I'm going to retire," and he did that. He's berated as a sort of, a sort of racist or whatever. But the reality is he did do what he said he was going to do. Would our leaders today, would our both industrial and technological and political, would they have the courage, dare I say, the balls to actually give up that power and say, we'll give it back to the people? And also, that's not economic value is more about mental and spiritual and physical health. And the reason I say that is we tend to conflate economics with what people, and I don't quite understand why we do that. And I would like to know what your opinion is on that as a statistician.
Sure. So before I get into that, Gennady, I had a little trouble understanding him. So I think your first question was around if, like, this hypothetical person that would amass all this power would be able to give it back.
Yes.
Gennady, were you able to
Yes.
what the second question was with regards to health and economics? I didn't hear that too well.
Yeah. So Zach, feel free to repeat if I didn't get the gist of it, but essentially it's about the connection between economics and the well-being of people. So you could see the well-being of people from the standpoint of quality of life or health outcomes, or Zach's own term, which is Freudenspanne or joy span, which he tries to pursue with his patients. So essentially, is there a way to connect an economic system to those kinds of outcomes so that they are necessarily fulfilled as an economy grows?
Oh, okay. All right. Wow. Okay. That's a lot. So I'll start with the first one with regards to giving back. So in the context that we were discussing with having the super intelligence, I would think giving back means turning off large segments of that super intelligent model, right? So like giving back could mean that people can, and I want to go back to the sense of purpose, which actually ties to your second point. I think it goes beyond just having money. And I don't mean this in a materialistic way. I think that we have, there's an innate part of human nature where, I'm gonna turn my light on. It looks like I'm liking this light. Okay, that's better. So I think that in human nature, there is an innate part of us that we want to contribute. And of course, there's different ways that we can contribute, but I mean like in a daily sense. I don't know if you know anybody like this, but I know people that retired and died shortly thereafter. And not because of horrible health, like they didn't have like a crazy disease. They weren't very depressed. It was because I think it's a fundamental component of the human condition that we want to be challenged. This is why if there's 5 things going on in your life that are good and one that is not, your brain will gravitate to one that is not. And it's not because we're negative. It's actually a survival instinct. If we go back 50,000 years and you're in a cave and there's a lion that's about to eat you, right? And you haven't eaten in 3 days, but you're really warm. You're not like, you know what? I'm actually like, I don't need to worry about this lion right now because I'm really warm. It's really comfortable. You'd be like, oh my God, I need to run as fast as I can. I'm going to get eaten. And then I need to find some food, right? So it's a part of our human condition to be challenged, to be dissatisfied, and to push to be comfortable. So if we're talking about this fantastical utopian scenario where everyone has everything provided for them, I can't guarantee anything. I'll just make it a statement of fact. I think, could be wrong, I think that people would still be unhappy because I think people are at their happiest when we are making progress and when we feel that we're contributing to something like that is larger than ourselves. So it's not about being paid for it. It's about having my identity being like, okay, I am a doctor. I am a, sorry, go ahead.
No, keep going. There was just
okay. So I think that and I'm going to go as far to say there's economic value in that. People are going to be happier, and there's value to their being happier. And I'll tie that to the second point that you made, Zach, that I think tying economic output to happiness is something that can, I mean, those are kind of different values. Like, I thought it would be really cool if at some point we can actually quantify something like the amount of dopamine that someone receives. So when you have I remember reading a statistic that when you are laughing really hard with a friend for 2 minutes, you get the same level of dopamine that you get from smoking roughly 1 hour of marijuana. I think that's I forget the exact study, but you can see like the vibe of that. So it'd be interesting if we could quantify the amount of dopamine. I don't know if dopamine captures, we're talking about what it is for someone to be happy. I think there's different kind of levels of that. It's a very complex term. So I don't know if dopamine exactly encompasses all of what it is to be happy. But if we could quantify that, I think it would absolutely be correlated with economic output, but it's not going to be exactly one-to-one. And I think what kind of makes sense, and hopefully we've hit an inflection point with AI, is we're at this point that our total collective economic output can still massively increase. We still haven't yet figured out how do we turn that economic output into having people be as happy as possible, right? And that's a balance. And we feel that, we feel that kind of tension politically, where it's like, okay, well, like, do we give money to people that aren't doing as well, or do we prioritize economic output? That's a really hard question for us to answer, because there's so much growth in either direction. And I think just kind of what's a little bit different about where this conversation has gone is that if we're talking about the super intelligence and we're talking about a place where we've really hit this place of diminishing returns, where it's harder to find a significant increase in economic value because we're so efficient, then I would think the only thing that's really left is to make people happier. So when I say, like, is it less economically efficient? Yeah, but it's not like to an extent that it matters. So it's like if you have $1 trillion and I'm saying, okay, but instead of $1 trillion, you have $999 billion. And by the way, there's a $1 billion difference between those two things, right? Like, that could be a better answer overall, depending on how you want to define best answer. And Gennady, the other thing I want to mention to kind of get on what you mentioned about science, I think we have to acknowledge that not everybody is going to want to be invested in science. I would 100% believe that it should be glorified more, and there should be more attention paid to it. So one thing I do with my family is that now my kids are too young to really know, but they'll start to learn it, is we kind of like they have the Oscars. We do something like that with the Nobel Prize winners, where we talk about who won the Nobel Prize. And what's so great about that is that with science, this is what I love about it. We're moving forward, and it's all good news. Like, there's so many things that happen in the world that are terrible. When things come out in science, I mean, generally, like scientific breakthroughs, it's good news. Oh, we found the God particle. Oh, we had a reaction where it generated more energy than what we put into it, right? These are exciting things to talk about. So I think we need to glorify science, but everybody doesn't want to be participating in science, and we don't want everybody participating in science, right? I mean, just some people that just maybe it's just a character thing. Maybe some people we don't trust, right? By the way, in science, and I'm not taking away from scientists, it can be easy to fake data. I worked in a lab where the raw data was a Western blot. If you've ever seen a Western blot, it's basically invented in the 1960s. Like, imagine, and I'm not even exaggerating, like a smudge of ink is the data, right? So you get these like 5 little columns, and it's showing kind of like how big the proteins are, or if the protein is if a protein is present. I won't get more detailed than that. I just want you to have in your head a picture where the data that is being published is these 5 like little strips, and each strip has a smudge of ink on it. You know how easy it would be for someone to say, hey, I saw a smudge of ink, when in reality they didn't. They just photoshopped it in, especially with AI now. You can make that thing however you want. So we want to make sure that people are of the correct character to be participating in science, because it's important, right? So I still think that people are going to want a sense of purpose, want a way to contribute, independent of like being paid a lot of money for it. Because I agree that it shouldn't just be around of I feel good because I'm being paid money. I'm saying contributing in a particular way. So I'll speak to myself. I love building models. I love it because I love math. I love that the models provide value. And I love the fact that I'm actually building something that, like, after it's done, it can operate on its own. Sometimes I'll name the models that I'm building so that I like short ways. I cannot stand creating like visual art. I'm colorblind. I've never been good at it. I don't value it. So like if someone said, hey, let's make a painting, I say I would really, really rather, I would literally pay to not paint something because I really dislike it, right? I'm not saying painting's worthless. It gets value to some people. There's more power to it. I don't want to be participating in that. And I think that everyone feels some way about different things. So in a perfect society, I would love it if they said, David, look, we've taken care of everything. You don't have to worry about food security. You got everything. I would still say, please give me some way that I can build something for you. I want to build some kind of math equation that's going to improve your life. Don't worry about paying me anything. I want to have that sense of purpose. Recognizing that, yes, maybe the super intelligence thing can do that, but I'm going to be a happier person, which means I'm going to be a better father. I'm going to be a better husband. I'm going to be a better friend. I'm going to be a better brother, community member. If I have some place where I feel I'm giving in a meaningful way. And so who cares if the artificial super intelligence was able to do it? If I'm able to contribute something and I'm not taking away significantly from the economy, I think it's worthwhile. If like I'm not the only person that's doing that. If we do that for like people, then we can be contributing, we can be productive, and we'll be moving towards this like utopian society.
Yes, thank you very much for that reply, David. And Zach expressed agreement with you in our chat. He also says stagnation is death, and figuring out ways to maximize the happiness of patients is what he and his team does at Austin Biotech. So Zach was our guest on multiple prior virtual Enlightenment salons as well. And he notes, yes, Western blots can totally be faked. Actually, the example of people who retire and then die shortly thereafter is epitomized by James Knox Polk, the President of the United States, whom Zach referred to. If you look at his Wikipedia page, he ceased to be president in March of 1849. He died on June 15th, 1849. And he most likely had underlying health conditions, but he decided not to run for a second term, and he was dead essentially 3 months after the expiration of his first term. So it is essential for humans to have a sense of meaning and purpose and to continue to be productive in some way that is personally fulfilling, whether or not it makes money. So if one does retire, one should continue working on personal projects, watching salons like these, participating in stimulating, thought-provoking conversations. And I think that's an important point to keep in mind as our technological capabilities advance. Now, we only have about 4.5 minutes left in our salon. I'm hoping that Art Ramon might have some time to ask a brief question or make a brief comment in that remaining time. So Art Ramon, please go ahead.
Yeah, when you started off, you mentioned how narrative, and that just got me thinking of an episode of the Y-Files when he was talking about psyops. So how to identify psyops. So he kind of, triggered that recall. And, it's very convenient that as the population of people globally is going down, the robots are getting better. So it's going to make it very easy to replace a lot of the manual labor with the robots that are advancing. So, and also some people consider that possibly conspiracy theory, that something's behind that, helping the population worldwide get reduced, lower sperm count and whatnot. So what are your thoughts on that?
You mean about like if robots, so Hans, I heard two very different things there. I heard about like robots are taking jobs, right? And the cost of benefits, and heard psyops. And the psyops, is that like psychic? Is that?
No. Psyops is when it's a government, what do you call it? Propaganda. It's a sort of propaganda by the government in order to write that narrative and get people to believe. So let's say the rationale why you would invade another country. So you would have to convince the population through propaganda that would be put out through the news media, and basically that would be what convinces people, the narrative that they're crafting to, shape it in people's minds so they're accepting of it. So that's the science.
So you're saying the propaganda is saying that there are robots that are taking people's jobs, and that would make people want to.
That would be the more the conspiracy theory narrative, but it's just that your narratives, had to recall that particular episode of the Y-Files. But
sure, yeah. So I mean, yeah. So I think that I think robots are taking some people's jobs. I don't think that's a conspiracy. I think that it is beneficial to most people when it happens. So like your car is less expensive because a robot is contributing, if not doing the whole thing and putting it together, because it costs the company less to produce that robot. That's good for the consumer, right? The product's cheaper. It's not good for the person whose job it was to like hammer in the parts to the car. I think both are true. I think capitalism was the force behind that. I don't think it was a conspiracy. I don't think that was a conspiracy theory. And I think where you're going with it, which is that like in general, and this is what I think is interesting about today's day and age. We used to be more prone to propaganda because we did not have access to the information, right? So if you think about things like the news, the only way that you could see the news, like let's say there was some court case that was going on, is every night for 30 minutes. Now this was CNN was around when I was a kid. I'm talking about like when my parents were kids in that generation. Like you had the news for 30 minutes a night, maybe twice a night, 8:30 and 10:30 or something, where they would give a recap as to what happened. And that was really your access. There was no internet. I mean, maybe there was radio that had that as well, right? But you were limited to that. So if you want to know what happened in the courthouse, you had two choices. You could physically go down to the courthouse and try to get your hands on the physical papers that had like, oh, here is the indictment and here was the testimony and here's everything that happened. Or what's more realistic is you sit in your couch and you hear what they told you happened, right? So you're very prone to propaganda. What's interesting about today's day and age is that we have access to the primary sources. You can read indictments. You could read testimony. You could read studies. You don't need to rely on these third parties to tell you what's going on. So if there's some entity, be it could be a government, it could be a business, it could be media, it could be your friend, doesn't matter. If there's some entity that is trying to push a narrative on you, it is so easy to just for 10 minutes do some research to see, well, what does the primary literature say, right? And if you have trouble understanding it, you can have chatbots help you to learn. I actually think that's the best use of chatbots, is for education, not for production. And then you can go about it. So I think that's a really good point, that when you're fed a narrative, you should just be alert. That's a narrative. If this is helping you feel better, that's fine. Going back to my talk, like bringing it full circle. If it's meant for the purposes of information, you should be like, wait a minute, that's a statement. Let's turn that statement into a question, into a hypothesis. And I'm going to go about like proving or disproving that hypothesis as objectively as I can, so you can obtain truth and move forward.
Yes, thank you very much for that response, David, and for bringing the discussion full circle. So this has been such a fascinating conversation. The time has just flown by, and just because of our time constraint, we will need to conclude our virtual Enlightenment Salon, but I do want to once again recommend that our viewers visit the website of StrataQuant, and particularly to listen to the episodes of Profit as a Science that are available there. Now, we have two questions about my past. Very briefly, did I wear bow ties at 14?
Yes, next question.
Yes, okay. Did I seem like the type who would be involved in politics back then?
Yes, next question.
Okay, those were the two
I believe,
questions.
correct me if I'm wrong. He was the president of our student council freshman year.
Freshman year, I was elected.
He was involved in college. I also distinctly remember that he made the rational argumentator. That is an artifact from when he was in high school. That was long time ago. So 100%. Everything we're talking about here, Gennady has been on that train from the day I met him when we were 14. So yes, those questions were easy. Love them.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you, David, for providing that confirmation. We were thrilled to have you as a guest on our virtual Enlightenment Salon today. And I think you and your insights are going to help us all to live long and prosper.